Okay, can you hear me on the back? Thank you very much for having me here. Before I will start, how many on this room are not using Amazon Web Services? Just raise your hand. Okay, thank you. That's good. So there will be slides that I can skip. So just introduction about myself. My name is Ben-Alta. I'm based in New York. I was in Seattle this week as well, and my friend at Alluxio, or partners, invited us to speak in this amazing summit. I attended some of the session, really cool. So I've been in Amazon Web Services 6+ years. I had different roles within Amazon Web Services, but I have a group of team of engineers and architects that help companies all around the world on building solutions around I see a lot of the big data. Today, AI is the big data, right? I just call it data and analytics, building solution using machine learning, and by leveraging different services on AWS, especially on the analytics and ML side of the house. And what I'm going to talk to you, and we have only 20 minutes, we talk about modern data platforms that are building in the cloud. I'll give you one use case with a customer that we work. I think they presented earlier today, but I will just give more emphasis of how they use what they call a hybrid cloud, when you have data on your own data center, but you also use the cloud to use the elasticity of the compute. And so why I talk about Flywheel, so I work for a company called Amazon, and if anyone is not familiar with that, it's the virtual cycle. This is the flywheel, very famous flywheel that Amazon came from many, many years ago, about how you build a growth of a business, or how you create a flywheel. So if you think about Amazon.com, for example, the idea is that if you want to create growth, you want to increase your customer experience, you have more traffic, you will have more sellers, then you can actually have more selection of products. And when you have that flywheel, you can actually lower the cost and lower the price. And that's really the vision of how we use it also in Amazon Web Services, where, since we launched, we reduced the price like 75 times. We don't believe that customers will tell us, hey, we want to get less features and pay you more money, right? So we always need to make sure that you're customer obsessed. So that virtual cycle, that's Flywheel also. And this is just a screenshot. There is a white paper inspired by Jim Collins, who wrote great about the Data Flywheel. And many of the sessions today discuss about, okay, how we use data in our organization, how we monetize the data, how we process the data. So if you think about Flywheel, first you need to move the data and workloads, in this case, like moving it to the cloud, but think about a persistent place where you want to store the data. Then you want to run your databases or all your data, and we'll talk about the concept of a data lake that is very popular over the past years. Then you want to build application, right? You want to build a data-driven application, whether you're building a recommendation system, or you create a data mart for your BI users, or you want to analyze, and eventually you use things like machine learning and AI to innovate on behalf of your customers. And today, every product that is being built in any company, they're thinking about analytics and machine learning in day one. If not, they should. So really, where I joined to Amazon Web Services back in 2013, I knew nothing about cloud. I run Hadoop on-premise, like a lot of MapReduce, etc. But when I joined AWS, I suddenly understand, like, hey, this workload is running on the cloud. It's pretty cool because I can separate between compute and storage, and I can have this elasticity of running a training job in the middle of the night with 1,000 nodes without really impact any business mission-critical system. And this is really why cloud was really built for this type of big data workloads. And I will skip some of it makes sense, like it's really straightforward, but for those is really the concept that you pay only for the workloads that you are running. That means that you don't need to have a large cluster and put a lot of capital expense on servers and compute, where you can just pay for just the workloads that you run. most of the technologies today that exist on cloud really are based on open source systems. So if you think about deep learning like TensorFlow, MXNet, Hadoop, Spark, Presto, Alluxio. So all these are very popular today by customers using some vendors of cloud that also provide like a managed services for them, but also there are third party that provide services like Confluent provide like a managed Kafka offering, or Databricks have a managed Spark, but also like in AWS you can use managed service for Kafka or other services. But really the idea is that's something that is very popular, and we see a lot of customers today really like to use the open source. The challenge is like how much you want to manage it and how much you want to put the hurdle on your operations team and infrastructure to tie all together. So when the problem starts, and this is, I will start with like problem statement and how we approach it from AWS. So the data has gravity, but is often untapped, right? So you want to democratize and put all your data in one place in a raw format. Like this is your starting point. Some companies call it a landing zone, or in the Hadoop worlds, if you remember, like you have the gold, the bronze, like different areas. But the idea is that you want to put it in one place. Then you have the data that is undiscoverable, and this is one of the challenges that we've seen many customers, that you have data that exists in on-premise in different systems, and there is no one way for you to access the data. This is why like some companies I've seen, they have like 20 BI solutions, or like multiple data warehouse. They have Teradata, Netezza, and the different business units have different data warehouse solutions. But you as a business, sometimes you want to have a one point, with one glass to look at all your data. So you want to build something consistent with an open data source format, right? Probably I heard a lot about people here like using things like Presto, so using ORC or Parquet, like the open data format that you can query the data with different tools. But customers also want to use machine learning, but really early in their data journey. And in order for you to really do something with predictive analytics, you need to start with the data, right? Like I've been many times in scenarios when customers say, hey, we want to do machine learning. And I ask them, okay, what is the use case? And they ended up like, all you need is better dashboard or reports. It's not really a machine learning problem. But when you want to tackle something with machine learning, you need really a clean data set in order to start using that data. And this is where like data scientists, today we see them a lot of time, they're spending their time on feature engineering and doing a lot of ETL and Spark, and until they can actually start building models, etc. So for that, you need a data lake. And this is a very high level of how companies are building data lakes. And I like the simplified view, because I can guarantee that every use case that you will have, you can apply for these steps, right? So you have data that comes from sources, and you have the step. You need to ingest the data. You need to store it somewhere. You need to analyze it. That's the ETL or the ELT. And then you need to consume it. And eventually, you have some insights. These are the use case. So when you want to collect and store the data at any scale, you want to do it at a low cost. You want one home for all your data. You don't want to have silos, right? You don't want to have the marketing. They have their own data warehouse. And the CFO has their own data warehouse, and they're not talking to each other. And when you start looking and the CEO come with questions, oh, we have some problem because they build their own ETL and they're not looking at the same source. And I don't know if you've been in these scenarios. I see people nodding their head. They know what I'm talking about. And also, you need to make sure that you think about security. In AWS with customers, every discussion starts with security, is job zero. And you want to find the right tool for the right job. And again, you don't see any name of services, but whether if you're using other cloud vendors or you're using it on-premise, so we can take each one of the technology and replace it. Yeah, for ingestion, if it's streaming, I can use Kafka, or I can use Kinesis if you're using on AWS. But you also want to make sure, and I heard questions today talking about data governance and metadata management, that you want to democratize the access to the data for the security, and also to be able to connect to different systems. Some customers are, they have like all databases and they need the change data capture. They need the transactional data that comes from different sources. So you want to have the connectors from the sources, but also some external application that need to consume. Let's say that you build a model, you want to actually implement the model and have the inference model on your mobile app, like you're using machine learning. So this is the holistic view of AWS Data Lake. Really, you use Amazon S3, our simple storage service, as a place where you put all your data. And around it, you have how you secure it. And there are different tools for you to secure. You can bring your own keys. You can use KMS. You can encrypt the data in a different ways. There are also different options to how to ingest the data. I will not go one by one. But this is something that we've seen repeatable, and last year where at Reinvent, customer told us, okay, we built this data lake, we have the data in one place, but even though we have the data, we still are not able to serve the business because we need a better auditing, we need to have better granularity and security and access. And last year, we actually built a service for that. And if you are using Data Lake on AWS, you should look at a service called Lake Formation that gives you this governance around data that you store on S3. And what it does, it's, I will skip all the graphics, but let's say that you have two accounts and you want to make sure that you have a column level encryption, right? Like one customer cannot access to this column, so you can control that column level bucket. You can register your buckets. So for example, you have one master bucket and you want one business unit to access to this bucket and another one should not access to that bucket. So that's another option that you have. If you are not familiar with that service, it's on the console, but you can actually create the data lake, build the permission, also look in the catalog, like customers like to know. Like if you're starting to do something, you want to use metadata and you want to tag all your data that you have there, because then you can actually reuse the data. Because I've seen many times when customers are not doing it, what they do, they duplicate the data. And one team taking the data that was duplicated and they have their own ETL, and then they enrich the data. They added another column, etc. And this is where, like, if you don't have that governance in the first place, then you're going to pay for that later. So Lake Formation is a tool like in AWS that you can use for that, and of course monitoring and auditing and understand who accesses the data. I will talk about two services on AWS because when I talk about the customer use case, so for those that are not familiar, so Amazon EMR is providing you a manage Hadoop, Spark, different open source libraries that running in manage, and you can actually spin up a cluster, adding node, using now to scaling, remove. But the idea with Amazon EMR, it's like reduce the cost significantly if you compare it to running an Hadoop, running on-premise with low commodity hardware. There is good numbers with data like how you can reduce the ROI, but the idea is that when using something like EMR, you pay only for what you use, and your workloads, especially in the data and analytics and machine learning, these workloads are, majority of them are transient, right? I need this cluster to run an ETL job just once a day, or even once an hour. You don't need to have a 24/7 cluster that is up and running. Now, yeah, there are cases that you need a persistent one to run 24/7 if you're using something like HBase with a lot of read and writes, etc. But again, it depends on the use case, but the majority you can use it in a transient mode. The next one is the next service is Amazon SageMaker. And Amazon SageMaker is a tool that customers are using for their machine learning workloads. You can build your model, train them, deploy it, and you don't need to use everything. You can say you have customers that using the notebook just to do the training, then they take the model, put it in container, and deploy it back in their own data center. And I'll show you how customers are using it. Then you deploy it in production, and you can also scale it. You don't need to deal with a lot of things that today, if you don't have some managed service, you need actually to tune, like TensorFlow with the GPUs and everything. So you have like one environment. You can select any deep learning framework or any machine learning framework. You can use it in conjunction with EMR if you want to run like Spark workloads today with Livy Server, with SageMaker. So these are like two main services that I wanted to talk today. We have others, but that are important where you're using AWS for this type of workloads that are very popular. Some customers that are using it, I will skip like all the logos, but very popular. Now, one of the things, and this is a real use case, if let's say that you want to build an industry data lake, you can have different sources in different systems. So for example, in your facility, you have like IoT data, you have a web application like cookies or other CRM data that comes from Salesforce, up to some different data sets that are public data sets that you want to load. And of course, classic data that is in logs or in databases. And if I use that example, like build an industry data lake, how you build a data lake eventually to use that, without getting into the technologies, skipping this one. So you have two mechanisms of ingestion, right? You have the real-time streaming, or you have the import batch, like someone FTP once a day a file, or you're sending and doing a push file once a day as a batch. And once you have the data in your data lake, you want to make sure that you classify the data, building the profile, the catalog, setting up the access control, and also deal with encryption. Now, how it works in AWS, when you do that, after that, you actually need to use the ETL and machine learning, and then you have the other application. So when you build it on AWS, and again, you have the slides later on so you can see, what I try to do is actually make it as a blueprint for you. So when you think about import it on batch, moving data from on-premise or in different system, these are the set of tools that you have. You can use Direct Connect. You can actually send a device to your on-premise, copy the data, and send it back. If you have petabytes of data, you can actually send a truck. We call it snowmobile that comes to your data center. And we have a database migration service if you want to move something like from Oracle to another database. If you're using something around real-time streaming, so you have options today on AWS like managed service for Kafka, or you can use Amazon Kinesis. That's for real-time. When you want to do the analytics and the processing, these are the list of services that uses. One approach we have in AWS is that one size doesn't fit all. Every customer is unique. They have different use case. They have different throughput, latency, service level agreement for those that remember it from the enterprise, like SLAs. So you have tools like you can use something like Athena or EMR or Redshift. And then if you want to use machine learning, you can use something like SageMaker, and you can build your own model or bring your own model. Or you can use like APIs that are using like recognition that you just call a REST API and get some results with a pre-ready models that exist today. So I will finish with customer case studies. So before I talk about the customer case study, it's actually DBS is the bank like in Singapore that presented. We have customers that still have data on their own data center. They didn't move to the cloud, but they want to use a way that how can I use the cloud to leverage the compute and the elasticity and the ability to pay just for additional workloads that I actually need for my workloads. So an example that what DBS did, and for those that do not remember from this morning, and this was presented at Strata conference in New York, is that they have their own data center, and they're using something like our partner Alluxio to be able to run these transient workloads without the need to move the data from their on-premise to the cloud. So they have a direct connect, 10 gigabyte per second direct connect between their data center to AWS. And they're using the data orchestration of Alluxio, the ability to now, let's say that I'm running an XGBoost, or I want to run a big training, and I don't have thousands of nodes available to me in my data center. They can leverage something like SageMaker and EMR, the cloud, run the training, add the compute that they need for these jobs, the output go back to their own data center, and they shut down the server. It means that I don't want to persist all the data or the data on S3. I just use the compute using a service like EMR with the Alluxio technology, and it's seamless for you as a customer when you use that approach. So that's something that customer using it as part of like the hybrid cloud when you want to use data that you have it on-premise and still running on the cloud. Again, it's up to the customers. They want to migrate, what their compliance, but the message is that usually what we do in AWS, we listen to our customers and where are you in the journey? What are your security, compliance, regulation, and your constraints? And we find you the solution, the right tool for the solution. So I think I met my time. Thank you very much for your time. Hopefully the pace was okay, but thank you very much for having me today.